few weeks ago, I was driving down 6th Ave, which is our probably most used road in Three Hills, and somewhere there was a real slow driver, probably about 2 vehicles in front of me. There's a vehicle in between us and the slow driver, and they were just crawling. So slow, and that can get really annoying. I don't know if you've ever driven in Three Hills, and sometimes there's just this person crawling, and somewhere between Wade Nelson's house and Chris Lowen's house, so, between the Three Hills School and Main Street stop sign, which there's a lot of kind of parked cars, and there's not a lot of space always there, but the person right in front of me had enough, and so they saw a little split second where they just, hammered down and went around the person, got to the four-way stop, and they're on their way. And I remember thinking, that's kind of silly, because on the one hand, it takes all of 5 minutes to get from any place in Three Hills to any other place in Three Hills, right? I mean, it's not that bad, but at the same time, we've all done that, haven't we? If you have your driver's license, you've done that, or you intended to do that, which is the same as doing it. And we just get so annoyed when it's like there's someone slow, and I have to kind of be careful, because in a small town, that slow person might have been one of you. Or the person that went around them might have been you as well. But, we can get so, impatient. And we do have a bit of a patience problem as humanity, don't we? Especially, here in North America, as we get so annoyed at, rush hour or traffic jams in Three Hills, of all places. But it can get really, really annoying. And one of the things I realized about our patience problem is, actually, we've been trained not to wait. It's just kind of part of our culture. We've been trained not to wait. Last year, my wife and I, for our anniversary, went to Kalispell, Montana. We kind of did a weekend away, just her and I. And on our way home, we were going to stop to grab some food, and Maddie wanted coffee. And so I love Chick-fil-A, so she found a Chick-fil-A in Kalispell. And I was going to get a chicken sandwich, and she wanted to get her coffee at an establishment, I won't say, but coffee, really good coffee. And so we go to the place to get her coffee, and she orders, and no joke, we waited, I think, 10 minutes. Maybe 8, but probably 12. So I'm going to say 10. So we waited 10 minutes for a coffee, and it was like, it's right there. I think they had to put cream in it. It was so easy. It's just get the coffee, and we want to go, We got a long trek. It's 7 or 8 hours, home, and it took so long. Finally, they gave her coffee. We get to Chick-fil-A, and I order my chicken sandwich, and they always, hot and fresh, and they make it right there. And so I had to wait 3 minutes, maybe 2 to 3 minutes. It wasn't very long for a chicken sandwich. But when they came out, they were like, "We are so sorry that you had to wait." And I'm like, it was 3 minutes for chickens. We just waited 10 minutes for a coffee. It was no big deal. And we're so sorry. And then they gave me this, which is a free sandwich the next time I go to Kalispell, Chick-fil-A. I know. And I'm like, that is awesome. My problem is I really want to use this because I'm a cheap Mennonite, but I'm in a conundrum because I have this free sandwich in Kalispell, Montana, and it expires at the end of December. And I don't know, do I drive 8 hours to get the free sandwich? Or do I? So if any of you are going to Kalispell, you come get a free sandwich and then bring it back for me, okay? Then bring it back for me. I love Chick-fil-A. But we hear a story like that and we say, now that is great service. And it is. It's great service. But there's this kind of underlying message that also says you should never have to wait. In fact, waiting is bad and it's wrong. And we should never have to wait. And yet, there's this saying out there, and you'll hear it, and you'll be like, none of us really agree with this, but it says, good things come to those who wait. And we're like, yeah, I've probably said that before, but let's be honest, none of us really believe that. I mean, try saying that the next time you come out of a sporting event and there's a traffic jam. Just say to the person driving, hey, good things come. And they'll be like, just be quiet. Right? I mean, we maybe believe that, on a theory level, yeah, good things come to those who wait. But, I mean, probably what we believe more is, good things come to those who, go out and get it. Right? Good things come to those who go out. I don't know why I just did that, but go out and get it. There's, if you want something good, you should go do it. right? Like if you want to have a great career, you should go to school. And then you should go work your tail off to gain a great career. If good things come to those who go out and actually go and get it. There's even a proverb on this, a true, scripture says this. It says, all hard work brings a profit. Those who are intentional, those who get up and go and do it, brings a profit. But mere talk leads only to poverty, right? Mere talk leads only to poverty. There's this idea that if you want to make money, you should just go and work. You should go do it. If you want to go get something in your life, you got to go do it. And yet there's this other thing that says good things come to those who wait. So how do we kind of like live in this tension of, do I go get it or do I wait? And where did that idea that good things come to those who wait come from anyways? I think it came from one word, and the word is patience. Patience. And patience, we all know, is a virtue, which we're not sure what a virtue is, but it sounds good. So patience must be a good thing, right? And so we have this idea, well, maybe patience is a good thing, and good people are patient, and then, because they're good, maybe there's a karma thing that happens, and then good things come to them, so good things come to those who wait. I don't know how we reason it, but we have this challenge, because patience, we think it's good, and yet none of us really like to exercise it. We like other people to exercise it on us. But how do we, live with this patience thing, and is it really all that good? Well, James talks about patience, and we're going to study a little bit about patience from the book of James today. And James comes from it from a little bit of a different angle. It's not, you should be patient because good people are patient. You should be patient because if you're a Christian, it's probably, it's one of the fruits, I think, of the Spirit and Galatians. Anyways, so you should be patient. James doesn't say, be patient because it's a good thing and good things will come to you because there's, if you do good, good will come to you. He comes from a different angle than that. James says, if you're a person of faith, because this whole series has been real life, real faith. And James just kind of talks about this is what faith looks like in real life. And as you come across things that are really, really challenging, real life, be patient, not because you want to be a good person, but because you're a person of faith. And James, he says patience actually comes out of, it is a resulting act of faith. That it looks beyond the right here, right now struggle. And it has an ability to wait. Wait. Faith and patience. And James doesn't talk about patience in the way that we've talked about this morning, like there's a traffic jam or 3 hills, slow drivers, or, I had to wait for food. James talks about it in real life. I mean, probably the areas that are most difficult to be patient and wait in, James touches on. And it's when you're suffering and when there's injustice. When things aren't as they should be, it is difficult to wait. And when you're suffering and there's this chance to retaliate and come back and hurt and set things straight, it is hard to wait in the suffering. And so James says, when things aren't right, and you're at work, the idea is, there's just this injustice. My boss just seems to have things against me. Patiently wait. And what about when there's injustice and there's this desire in me to go set things straight? James would say, in some areas of our life, we just need to patiently wait. What James is going to tell us is patiently waiting for God actually works out. Patiently waiting for God actually works out in the end. And maybe you're pushing back a little bit and you say, no, I patiently waited on God. I prayed that my mom would be healed from cancer. And I prayed for years, and God did not come through. She's gone. And I faced injustice, and I have a family situation with my mom or my dad or a spouse, and they're treating me, and I have prayed and I have waited, and God does not come through. And James will say, no, patiently waiting for God works out. But it works out in the end. It's the life of faith, looking beyond what's currently right now in front of you. So if you have your Bibles, turn to James chapter 5. If you have a great memory, you'll remember last week we read James chapter 5, verse 1 to 6 already, and we studied a little bit. But I did say that we were going to touch on it because what James, the first 5 verses of James chapter, or 6 verses of James chapter 5, it really lays the context of what James is going to say when he talks about be patient. And so James says this, and he writes about some injustice, some suffering that's going on. But he writes this to rich people that were non-believers, and he's not against rich people, and he's not against non-believers, but he's against how these non-believing rich people became rich. And this is what James says. It says, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that's coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. Now, if you remember from last week, James has just talked about the shortness of our lives, and we should live like God exists. If it is the Lord's will, we'll do this or that. Now he writes to non-believers who became rich, but they became rich in such a way that they were living like God doesn't exist. Like the earth is a closed system, and you get what you want no matter who you walk over. And these rich people have gotten rich, and they were living like wealth is all we have. And probably if you didn't believe in God, maybe wealth would be all you have because you only have this life to live. And so they have collected all these things. And so James comes against them, one, to speak against them, but also it's the Christians who are going to read this. And he says, listen, you're poor. Don't chase and envy the wealthy because even their wealth will corrode. It will disappear. It will be eaten. But then he gets angry at them. He says, listen, I'm not angry because you're rich. It's because you have hoarded wealth in these last days. There we go. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. And then here's how you even got wealthy. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty, Lord of hosts, Lord of the armies of God. He is a judge, and he's coming back. So he says, you should live like God exists. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence and fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who is not opposing you. So James is not against rich people, and he's not against unbelieving people. He's against those who would become rich in a way that defrauds the poor, but then when they get their wealth, they just hold it all to themselves and don't share it or help others in need. That inhumane act James is against. And so James gives it to them really hard, but really what this is also doing is it's setting up the context of what he's going to say next and the situation that was going on. See, because the next verse in verse 7, James is going to change direction or change who he's speaking to. He speaks to non-believing, wealthy lords of the people that are killing and murdering and condemning the innocent one, but now he's going to speak to the innocent one, to the poor. And he's writing to the church because most of the believers were poor. And he writes this, he says, brothers and sisters, be patient. Be patient. Be patient, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. So he's written to non-believers and says, you should live like God exists. God is going to show up. But now he writes to those who are suffering, those who are facing injustice. And he says, now what does it look like to live like God exists if you're facing injustice? He says, do this. Be patient. Not so that you're a good person. Be patient. Not because maybe, your situation will change instantly. Be patient. Why? Because of faith. Because by faith, you don't see it with your eyes yet, but the eyes of faith see that God is going to show up. So you can be patient, even in the face of suffering, because the Lord is coming back. And then he gives kind of an everyday example, it was for them and kind of is for us too, about those who are patient. They do this all the time. And he says, look, see how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crops, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. Now, I'm not sure why James chose farmers as the shining example of patience. I know some farmers. They're pretty patient. But I think what he's trying to say is, listen, there's some things farmers, not because they want to, almost because they have to. There's some things farmers cannot control. I mean, they throw the seed in the soil, and in our day and age, they fertilize and weed it maybe with some chemical. But then in essence, they have to wait. And farming was kind of the same in Palestine 2,000 years ago. The farmer would plant the seed. The only thing is they didn't have crop insurance. And so it's like if that crop didn't grow, they were going to die. This was how they lived. This was the main mechanism for surviving in that day. And so he says, listen, look how patient they are. And they have to wait for the autumn and the spring rains. Now, that's maybe a little bit strange. In essence, the translation could be for the early and late rains. The early and late rains. And farmers, even today, they want early and late rains. Farmers, they plant the crop, and either they want a little bit of rain before they put the seed in the ground so it will germinate, but for sure after they plant the seed, farmers are always like, pray for rain, because they want that seed to germinate. But then you'll hear farmers around, late July, early August, often they'll say, oh man, we've had a great, year, but we just need a little bit of rain right now because we've got stock and we've got heads, but we need those to fill out, to get full, right? And so we want some early rains to get it going, some heat to get it to grow, but then we want some late rain to get it to be full, to get a great crop. And James says, look how they patiently wait. They can't control the weather. And farmers know that from this year. I mean, farmers cannot control the weather. And this year we had kind of early rain, and then we had mid-rain, and then we had late rain, and then the rain never stopped. And the farmers were kind of like, we just need to get the crop off the field. And so it was a challenge, but you just patiently wait. What else can you do? You can't change the weather. And so James says, be patient like the farmer and wait for those farmers who wait for the early and the late rains. And this reference to early and late rains was actually a reference to God's blessing in the Old Testament. And in Deuteronomy chapter 11, God had told the people this. He said, listen, if you follow me and you obey my commands, I'll bless you. And here's what it's going to look like. Then I'll send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine, and olive oil. Douglas Moo, in his commentary on James, says every reference in the Old Testament that refers to early and late rains is always in the context of God's faithfulness. Always in the context that God will show up. And so when James says, as you suffer, as you face injustice, be patient. Be patient because God is coming. The Lord is coming. See how the farmer waits for the autumn and spring rains? And all the Jewish Christians, and they were all Jewish Christians, when they first read this, they've been right. Every time God talks about early and late rains, it talks about his faithfulness. He's going to show up. He's going to come through. So just like the farmer, James says, you too, be patient and stand firm. Stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. Stand firm is really this. Be aggressive in your waiting. See, waiting and patience is not passive. It is aggressive. It is an aggressive posture that we take, that we will not cave, that we will stand firm. Because the Lord's coming is near. Now, scholars debate, does that mean Jesus is coming back? Yeah. Does it mean that God's going to show up and set things straight? Yeah, both are true. God is going to show up. Now, in the meantime, as you wait, James says this, as you wait, in the meantime, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Now, at first, when you read James, you kind of think, okay, we're talking about perseverance and patience, and then it's like, don't grumble, and then he goes back to perseverance and patience. Did he have like ADD? I think he did, but I think it kind of connects with what James is talking about, because in the waiting, and if you've ever gone through anything hard or you've had a bad day, what happens when you come home? You save face with your friends, right? At work, you're kind of nice, and yeah, it's been a tough day, but we're getting through it. And then you get home and what? They get it all, right? Oh, I'm just so, and the wife and the kids, and it's like the husband, we just let it all out with those we're closest to. And James sees this in the church, in the early church. And as they were facing injustice and as they were facing suffering, they were prone to just get on each other in the church. And so he says, here's what it looks like to live like God exists when you face injustice. Be patient. Here's what it looks like to live like God exists in your patience. Don't grumble. God is going to show up. The judge is standing at the door. So remember, be patient and in that patience, don't grumble. In James's context, as I said, there was a lot of landlords and people that were completely hurting the poor Christians, and like financially poor Christians, not like, oh, poor Christians, but financially poor. They were struggling, they were suffering. Some of them had even died in the church. And a lot of scholars think that in the church, there was this kind of rise of, we need to take arms. We need to fight back. We need to bring justice. We need to come against these landowners and hurt them because they're hurting us. We need to retaliate. And so James says, don't grumble against, don't let this faction start. Rather, be patient. Don't take the violent route, take the non-violent route. Live like God exists. The judge is standing at the door. Paul to the Romans says something very similar. When you face injustice, and he says this, don't repay anyone evil for evil. Yes, you've been hurt. Yes, you've been wronged. Yes, it wasn't right, but don't pay them back evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Yeah, but you don't know what my spouse, live at peace. But you don't know what my boss, live at peace with everyone. Don't pay back evil for evil. Rather be patient is the idea. And then he says, actually better than paying them back, do this. Don't take revenge, my friends, but better than taking revenge, let God deal with it. Leave room for God's wrath, for it's written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. And so James says the same thing. If you're going to live as though God exists, let God's justice be justice. You don't have to take every situation and put it in your hands and make it right. In fact, I think this is one of the reasons if you're not a follower of Jesus, you should be a follower of Jesus. Because here's the deal. If the world is a closed system and there's no God and there's no judgment, what do you do with all the injustice that's in the world? Because when you look in the world, there is not a lot of justice. You would go crazy trying to set every record right. But as followers of Jesus, we don't have to live with that, I have to fight for me, I have to fight for this, I have to fight for justice. We can let those things into the hands of God and trust that He's going to make it right. But sometimes, in the meantime, it can be hard to be patient. It can be hard to not grumble. And so James says, let God deal with it. Don't grumble against each other, because the judge is standing at the door. Live as though God exists. And then he gives an example of those who did this in the past, the prophets. He says, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count blessed those who have persevered. Now, the prophets in the Old Testament, you know this, they spoke God's word to the people. They were kind of priests and prophets, the real godly people, I guess, or there was judges too, but priests and prophets. And priests, they represented the people before God, right? The people have sinned and we'll sacrifice and we'll try, and they represented the people before God. Prophets represented God before the people. And it was like God would have a message and the prophets would speak the message of God. Now, it wasn't always the most glamorous job, because usually God's message to the people was like, you're sinning, you're not following me, you better turn, or I'm going to bring some discipline, and discipline isn't going to be fun, and you should, so it's kind of like no one liked the prophets when the prophets were living, because it was always kind of this really hard message. And so they endured suffering. Being a prophet of God meant you would endure suffering. And probably the most shining example of prophets and suffering was the prophet Jeremiah. And probably James was thinking of Jeremiah. No one liked Jeremiah when he was speaking. In fact, God told him, he said, I want you to speak my word. And by the way, your entire life, your entire ministry, nobody's going to listen to you. Now go, man, you got this. Let's go win this one, right? Like, I've already lost. Okay. But this was their life. It was perseverance in the face of suffering. For Jeremiah, himself, he was cursed by the people. The people cursed him. He was given death threats. I don't know if those were emails or hand mail or probably word of mouth. I don't know. He was thrown into a cistern, an empty well for dead. And then they took him out and arrested him instead. They burned the book he wrote. He's like, I'm going to write down everything God told me to tell you. And they're like, we don't like you or your book or what God's saying. They burned it. They never listened to him. This was the life of Jeremiah the prophet. And James says, listen, we count those blessed who have persevered. And we all see Jeremiah, we're like, I don't know if that's the blessed life. I don't know if that's the fortunate life. But the Jews understood blessing wasn't just material. But if you were close to God, that was the blessed life. And so James says the same thing. We count blessed those who have persevered, those who stay close to God. God is close to them. And then he gives an example of someone who persevered and was blessed for it, even on this earth, in fact. He says, you've heard of Job's perseverance and seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Compassion and mercy. Job's a bit of an interesting study. You can read it. There's a book of Job in the Old Testament, but the Coles Notes version is Job was one of the wealthiest men in the world. And he had everything. God and Satan had a conversation one day, and Satan said, you know, the only reason Job loves you, God, is because you've just given him everything. Anyone would love you if they've been given everything. If you take some stuff away, he'll curse you. So God said, fine, Job, you can do whatever you want. Or fine, Satan, you can do whatever you want to Job. The only thing is you can't kill him. So Satan went crazy. He destroyed everything Job owned. He lost all of his wealth, all of his land, all of his houses. In fact, all of his kids died. The only person that Satan didn't kill was Job's wife, but then Job's wife turned against him and said, Job, why don't you curse God? But Job remained faithful to God. Now, he did complain about the situation he was in a few times, but he persevered. He said, God is my Redeemer. I will continue to trust in him. He will be the judge. And eventually God turned things around in Job's life. And the end of the story is Job gets everything he lost. He kind of gets it back. Now, we don't know if God raised his kids back to life or just gave him new kids, but he got all his wealth back. In fact, it doubled. And the point I think that James is making by bringing up Job is this, that patiently waiting on God, it works out in the end. It works out in the end. Because God is faithful every single time. God is a God of compassion and mercy. Faith, to live like God actually exists in the real area of life of injustice and suffering, means to patiently wait on God. To patiently wait on God. Because in the end, it will work out. Now, what do we mean by that? Does it mean that, like Job, you're going to get it all on this earth? Maybe not. Probably not every time. But in the end, maybe your end, that God is going to show up. There is a judge coming. Jesus is returning, and things will be set straight. So what situations in your life, there's probably some situations in your life that you need to act on. Right? Just like the proverb, all hard work brings a profit. And, some things we need to go out and grab. God has given us responsibility, that you have control over. Maybe you're saying, well, I need a job and probably sitting and waiting. God would say, why don't you go apply some places? But where do you wait? You wait patiently with results and outcomes. There's some things maybe you need to do in your family that God's saying, hey, you need to do this. But then you need to patiently wait on the results. You may have a health situation that you're saying, there's some things you can control. You can control how much you exercise and how you eat, but you have to hold outcomes by waiting patiently on God. There's people in your life that you can't control. And with them, you need to wait patiently. The thing you need to concentrate is, how do I respond? I love what Barb Hazelton said, a lady in our church a few weeks ago at Anja's shower. She said, what other people do is reflective of them. How we respond is reflective of us. And so God has given us responsibility for how we respond. We are not responsible for what other people do. And so in those areas, the things we can't control, and God hasn't given us control of, we pray, and then we wait patiently. And we trust, and we know that in the end it will work out because God comes through every single time. Now, for some of you, you may be kind of pushing back right now. You're saying, I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. I've been waiting a long time. What do I do if I've waited so long? God hasn't come through yet in this area or this health area or this situation or this family crisis, or God hasn't come through. What do I do if I've waited and waited and waited? James would say this: God is faithful in the waiting. If he hasn't come through yet, keep waiting. Keep waiting. Come on, that's what James would say. That God will show up. And if he hasn't shown up and he hasn't come through, keep waiting. Now, there's some Christians in the early church, right around the same time James was writing his letter, Peter writes to. And Jesus, before he left the earth, he said, I'm coming back. And everyone thought he's coming back soon, so probably in our lifetime. And then Jesus didn't come back in their lifetime. And some people started dying. And some of the early Christians, they said, I don't think we can trust God. I don't think he's going to come through. We've waited and waited and waited. Now we're suffering and we're enduring persecution and we're enduring injustice. I think we should give up on God. And Peter writes to them and says, listen, if you're tired of waiting, you don't think God is going to come through, keep waiting. He will come through. This is how he says it in 2 Peter. He says, but do not forget this one thing about God. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. See, sometimes we say, God, you're slow. God, you're supposed to come through right now, and you haven't. And Peter says, no, listen, God works on a different kind of clock than we work on. And I kind of liken it to this. 5 years, the feeling of time is kind of relative, isn't it? And this is my theory. 5 years seems like a really long time when you're 5 years old, because it's your entire existence. Like, I have to live my whole existence again to get to 5 years. But when you're 50 years old, 5 years feels like a really short time, because it's just like a little segment of what you've already lived. It's kind of relative in that way. That's why we think time goes faster as we get older, because the amount of time is less compared to how much we've lived. Now, Peter is saying, think about God, the eternal God. Do you think 1,000 years is like anything to him? If you're eternal, you had no beginning and no end, you've always existed. He says, listen, God is eternal. 1,000 years is it's like a day. Time is different in that sense to God. And so as you've been waiting and waiting and waiting, don't give up. God is not slow. He's eternal. It's a little bit different, so keep waiting. He will come through. Now, I did a little bit of math because I'm a little bit of a black and white guy. So I did some math because I thought, what does it mean? Okay, if a day's 1,000 years, what's a minute? What's a second? What's a year? Okay, so just know, Peter did not mean this. I'm just doing this. I'm pretty sure Peter didn't mean this, but it might help us kind of understand that God's timeline is a little different than ours. So if a day is 1,000 years, if you do the math, a second is 4.2 days, okay? If a day is 1,000 years, a minute is 253.5 days. And an hour would equal 41.7 years, a day, 1,000 years, okay? So that's how it works. So the next time, if you're saying, God, I'm just struggling with this and I need an answer like this second, wait 4.2 days and it's going to work out. Or if you're like, God, I've been this injustice and I got a minute and you to speak to me this minute, just wait 253 days, okay? And he's going to come through. Or if you're like, God, I need you this hour. I need thee every hour. 41.7 years, okay? So just keep waiting. God's timeline is, we laugh, but that is kind of, we can get tired in our waiting. And it makes sense. We are human, and, 41 years is a long time to wait. This past week I was teaching in religious ed about Abraham and Sarah. And it's interesting, God gave a promise to Abraham that he's going to make him into a nation and do it through a child. And he made that promise to Abraham when he was 75 years and Abe had no kids. And that promise wouldn't be fulfilled for 25 years. And in the waiting, Sarah started to grumble a little bit and Abraham started to laugh and think this was a cosmic joke, because waiting on God can be challenging, because, maybe 25 years is like 45 minutes in God's timeline. He says, it's coming. Don't worry. It's not long. And we can get tired in the waiting. So I want to encourage you. I don't know what you're wrestling through right now that you're saying, God, I just need you to come through, and you haven't, and I'm getting tired in the waiting. Would you patiently wait on God? Because God will come through in the end. He does every single time. And if you think, God, I'm getting tired, would you be patient in your waiting? And if he hasn't come through, keep waiting. I don't know what family crisis or what health thing or what you're praying for right now, and you're saying, God, I need you to come through. James's message to you would be suffering is real. Injustice is real. And James would say, I'm not pushing this down. Oh, just wait, it's so easy. Say, I know how difficult it is, but hold on. Patience is not something good people do in the church. Patience is a resulting act of faith. God is coming back. God will set things right. I will trust in him. Let's bow to pray. Father, thank you for your goodness. We sang earlier, your goodness is running after us, and our response would be to sing of your goodness till our last breath. But God, that song's a hard one to sing in the middle of suffering and injustice and pain. And James and the early church, they understood suffering and pain. Many of them died at the hands of landlords and a culture that did not understand the Christian faith and persecuted them. And you're called to them, you're called to us in the middle of injustice and pain, and the things we can't control, the way people treat us and so on, is to patiently wait on you. God, I pray that we would be those who patiently wait because we are people of faith. Thank you that we can trust you. I pray these things in your name. Amen.